Austin, we're at number 75.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
No, it's gone quickly.
When you think back to 2.5 years ago and starting Win Awakening, which started in both of our hearts way back in, I guess, the early 2000s, I think 2005-ish, with your picture that you drew, and then the journey of 18 years as a family. But then a year and a half ago, your siblings have this idea that you and I should start a podcast. And we both, I think, had things go through my mind. I know I was thinking, I can't do all that technology. I don't know, but what was going through your mind when they suggested this idea?
I don't want to be up there talking on a podcast and everyone listening to me. So,
well, here we are. And we're going to get into some of the people and things we've talked to recently, but I think I can speak for both of us. It has been an amazing journey to enter into people's lives and just to let them share and for us to be able to come alongside and prompt thought. But today I think is really what we wanted this to be initially.
Yeah.
Because this whole idea came from just living life as a father and a son. You driving home from work and wherever I was located, we would just talk. And, you think about all the people around the world that do that. And I think we take for granted those conversations we have with those that we love and encounter more than anyone else. And as you know, and we've tried to be raw, and today we'll see what comes out too, but, some of those conversations are times of joy and excitement and things to look forward to. And in this profession, maybe promotion or a new job. And then there's those days that you're driving home and maybe your head coach was on you, your team wasn't doing well, or you wanted to quit, or whatever those negative thoughts could be. So that's life. And that was really what we wanted Awaken Kingdom Culture to be, our podcast. And we wanted it to, have this opportunity for you and I just to talk and share our life and then bring guests on. So it's been very exciting, and I'm excited to be with you today. And what I thought I'd do, and we're going to go, bounce around a little bit. We're going to hear what you're doing with your life right now too, and outside of the things of Win Awakening. But I thought I'd start with just a couple, I call them conversation starters, because they were, it's people that have spoken to me over the last, let's say, 6 weeks, maybe even 2 months.
yeah.
And some of this people have heard a lot about or have heard before, some of these. And the first one, which I don't know how I ended up doing this because this is an old thing, but everyone knows, I think, of the great basketball coach that was at North Carolina State named Jimmy Valvano. And Jimmy Valvano gave a great speech one night at the ESPYs or ESPN Awards, and he was dying of cancer. He was talking about how to get through life. And he said there's 3 things that everyone should do every day. And when I was listening to it, I was actually partaking in all 3 of these when he was sharing the first time I heard it. And he said, number one, we're getting to laugh every day. Last night, Mom and I were watching a corny movie and we were laughing. And I know you and I laugh. And it's good to laugh. So laugh every day, people. We need to think. We need to spend some time in thought. All through the scriptures it talks about, think on these things and let your mind be transformed every day. So take time to think. And then another one that we forget about sometimes because we don't want to show our emotions is it's good to cry. Let your emotions be moved to tears. So laugh, think, and cry, Jimmy Valvano said. Now, he said, that is a full day. And I think of 1 Thessalonians 5, 16, and 18, and it says, make joy your continual feast, and make prayer your lifestyle, and in everything give thanks to God. And so laugh, think, and cry 7 days a week. If you can do that, Jimmy Valvano says you got something special. So I just thought I'd start our time together with that thought to give us the thought of gratitude in our heart. And then I wanted to bounce into, we've had 10 guests, hard to believe, since we've been together alone. And I thought it would be good just to, take some of these guests and talk about some things that they have shared and how we've thought through those things. And you may have some that I didn't even put on paper, but I'm just going to pick some words. You know, we had Paul Young, and some people know of Paul Young. He's the author of the famous book, The Shack, and the movie that came out of that. And Paul talked a lot about perspective. You know, he said our whole lives, he was talking about when he got on our podcast, if you remember, he said our whole lives, guys, has led up to this moment from the time we were conceived. Our whole lives have been made for now. You know, he said, this is how we experience eternal life. And he talked about staying in the present moment. He said, when we learn to live without expectations, everything becomes a gift. So this whole thought, Austin, of perspective and expectation and living in the moment, what did you take from that when Paul was talking? How did that help you right in your life now?
First off, I think just sitting and listening to him, you know, the first initial thought is how wise he is. And the more that you think about wisdom, you think of the experiences that a person goes through and kind of their journey with God that has led them to that point. And everyone, or at least the book and the movie, has been a big part of our family's lives. And I know so many people as well. But The Shack talks about kind of like what he's had to walk through and experience and grapple with God, about who God is and how he relates to us and how we relate to him. So for me, you know, as I sit and think, I say that guy's extremely wise, and it was just such a blessing to sit on that podcast and be able to be in conversation with him, because he's so humble. And then there's some people who are, you know, they may come off humble, but you don't sense that humility. I mean, you and I mean, we're just a couple of guys, you know, who have been impacted by this guy's book and his movie, and we got on there and we just had conversation with him, and it felt so natural. You know, so his wisdom leads you to some of those points, and you know, the first one being that if everything works out for our good, and in knowing him, you know, then this present moment has great value because everything has been leading to this moment.
Mm.
You know, our God, yes, he's a God that is over the past and he's over the future, but he lives in the moment. And for us to be able to learn how to accept the present moment that we're in, it allows us to, you know, do the best we can in that moment, or see people more clearly in that moment, and you know, share God's love ultimately. So I think it was just a good reminder when he makes that comment to us that you know, every interaction has purpose and a meaning, because every person is valuable and important. And he reminded us in that one comment that it doesn't matter what the status a person carries, you know, the status that we all do carry, if we're looking right, is we're valuable to the one who created us. Therefore, we all need to be valuable to each other because of our creator. And then just expectations. What a great comment. You know, the thing that really got my mind going, Dad, was when he was referring back to a conversation he had had with his father later in his father's life. And I forget the exact situation, but basically his father disappointed him again. And he's walks away from the house where the party or whatever the event was, and he's just having this conversation with Papa. And you know, the way he put it made it so clear for me. He talked about God just got his attention, and he said, you know, why would you think that he would be different today than he has been over the last however many years his dad was alive? And what God showed him is that what you've created are these expectations, just like putting out landmines in an open field.
Mm.
And when they step on those landmines, which are inevitable because you can't see them, because those are people's expectations, then you're the one getting disappointed. And the beautiful thing that he talked about was when you step back and you remove those expectations, what ends up happening is you begin to see people the way Christ sees them, without expectation. And when you see them, as not for what they can do for you, but you see them as a human being. That was the thing he said. They become
Yes.
human. It gives you freedom just to be in relationship with them. You're able to go deeper than past their performance and see, really the depth and complexity in the story that person carries. And then what ends up happening is, what I'm finding, Dad, through the drive, through that conversation, through our daily relationship is powerful.
Hmm.
If you can just continue to be in relationship, there's no telling what can be accomplished or moved or changed or grown over time.
I think that, you made me think of so many things that he shared, but there was one word which we'll get to later in our time together that I want to harp on because it's the word that probably is where the Spirit's working the most in my life today. And that was he called it the journey to trust.
Mm,
And you can't trust outside of the now, right now. He said you can't trust next week. You can't trust something in the past. He said the eternal life and meeting with Papa and trusting him is only in the moment.
yeah, that's well
So we'll
said.
get more. We'll get more to that later. So that was Paul, and then we had two guests, different weeks, but similar in their approach of their profession. We had Dr. Amber Selking, and we had Ted Rath, and both of them are, let's call them, mental performance coaches in their own way, and both have written books. And we talked a lot about mindset and how do we think right. You've heard me for years. One of my mentors, who's in his mid 80s, old time, he was a backup quarterback to Roger Staubach back at the Naval Academy. And he one day came to my staff and he put up a chart on the whiteboard. And on the left hand side, he put the word feel, drew an arrow from it downward to the word act, and then drew another arrow down to the word think. And he said, this is how most of us live our life. We let our feelings control how we act, and then how we act causes us to think of who we are that way. And then he drew an arrow from the word think upward to another column on the right, and he put the word transformational on that long arrow. And then the right-hand column said think, then an arrow down to act, and then act on the feeling. And what he flipped was, he said, hey, how we think controls how we act, and how we then act will control how we feel. And he said, that's transformational thinking. And we talk about that a lot as coaches, transformational versus transactional. So we got into that with Ted and Amber. And then they also threw these words out, which I'd like to get your thoughts on, is excellence versus perfection. Is there such a thing as perfection? And if not, what does excellence look like?
Well, you know me, Dad. I've always struggled with perfectionism. That's something that's been a big storyline in my life. And not that I ever really thought that I could be perfect, but there was this underlying expectation. Back to that word expectation. That's the standard. Anything less than that leaves room for disappointment, frustration, continual focus on improving, which, in the story of my life, it's, never being good enough, never measuring up, continually having to strive to reach somebody's, at least my expectations of what I thought someone else's expectations were, which is, the reality is most people don't think about other people. So, it's not like they're spending a bunch of time thinking about me, but in my warped way of thinking, I was constantly evaluating where I stacked up. And also with my fear of failure, coming up short, I was doing everything in my power to be prepared, to know what to do so that I don't have to um, be in a relationship where I haven't measured up, because I was so afraid of being exposed and known in a way where, you know, not being that mask of perfection. So when they sit there and they talk about striving, in the direction of maybe what a perfect standard was, but learning how to rest and be content with excellence,
Mm.
you know it's freeing. And my spirit sings because I do believe we're called to use our gifts to the full, to do our very best, with what we've been given. But to be discontent, to always be looking over your shoulder, or to be living in the gap like we've talked about before, uh, my spirit just tells me, or the spirit is just telling me, that that's not what he has designed for us. That is not kingdom living. Because we're called to experience his rest, his peace, his joy. But the only way you can do that is if you internally accept. Acceptance is key. Accept the truth of your existence, your being, your worth. And and in the performance world that we live in, we're told that our worth is based on our next performance. And if you really start to dwell on that, you can very easily become a very anxious individual, which is also not a fruit of experiencing his life. So to me, um, learning how to be experience excellence, and listening to them is really that standard, is to, like Amber was talking about, learning how to be adaptable, you know, the pre-snap and post-snap. That was something that I thought she described well. And just uh, Ted's focus on just coming in with a great attitude every day, and attacking what's in front of you. So I thought, um, you know, their conversations about um, focusing on uh, performing in the realm of excellence, or living in excellence, was right on.
It's. I also thought that they did a nice job of saying that within excellence, failure is a piece of that,
Yeah.
because you're going to do your best, and there is going to be failure. How do
Yeah.
you respond to the failure? And so, leaving room for failure in your life, whether you're Michael Jordan, or Tiger Woods, or you and I, it's going to be a part of your growth process, failure. So how do you deal with failure from a perspective of excellence? I thought that was really good. And then, they talked a lot about belief. You and I have talked about that. We'll even get into that with some of the things you're doing. Talked about breathing life, words matter, all those things that, once again, both of them deal a lot with an athlete's mindset. And how do we set our minds to live from what is true versus the things we hear, the things we say to ourselves. So I thought both were really good too, and highly recommend them. And another one, or the next one I think we had, I'm just going to throw the name out to you and let you say what spoke to you. Brian Hansen. What about our 15-year Pro Bowl punter?
Humility was a big thing. To be as established and accomplished as he was, to come in with such great humility and kindness. And one of the things that just was so impactful and encouraging for me and you, Dad, was just the hand of Papa in that week.
Yes.
It's truly amazing how God coordinates conversations. In this case, it was another podcast. When and then the timing of when people see it and how they see it, and just to encourage you along the way is unbelievable. For those who don't necessarily know what I'm referring to, this is kind of what happened. Like we said, this whole podcast is about me and you talking together. Well, this doesn't just happen on air. We call each other, and for those who have been listening, you've been struggling over the last few weeks and months and stuff, and it's we've had some raw conversations, and during that time, during that particular week, we're sitting there. One of the questions that I heard you say, maybe not verbally, but in just our conversation, is what am I doing important? Does it have any value? And so you like you always do with some of these podcasts, you get on and look at some other podcasts this person might have been doing, and or you research them, and you haven't talked to him in a long, long time. So you get on and you're watching some podcast, and that he's doing, and he gets there, and they ask a question about who are some players or people around you that have played a role in your spiritual life, and he continues to go on to say that in an NFL locker room, there's multiple different, or there's tons of different people, and he talked about one specific person who sat on his left, who basically was the king of the city he lived in, and was a well-known player, is in the Hall of Fame, and had an impact on his life. But then he talked about this no-name third-string quarterback who sat on his right, and it was you, Dad. And just once again, not that changed the world, but what it did is it reminded that every interaction, every moment, every thing that we might not deem as valuable has purpose and value. Because if for nothing else, Dad, if it was only to encourage you, or I don't even know how many years ago you were on the Saints. So you're there for like
40.
9 months. What?
40 years ago, almost
40 years ago, you have a 9-month window where you get to know this guy. And then 38 years later, he's on a podcast talking about the impact you play and just his relationship with God. And then 2 years later, you hear that to encourage you in a week that is discouraging. And I just sit and say, if that isn't the work of our God, and that intimate know, Dad, like he knows what we need just to keep experiencing that hope that is found only in him. And so for me, that was so encouraging, and he echoed it on our podcast. And there was just so much wisdom that came from him. But, I'm trying really the glory to God, and just how God provides and encourages along the way. That's what stuck out for me.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Obviously, it really touched me both times. And, I've referred to that as just a tapestry of life. We take for granted, and I encourage our listeners sitting there right now, just like you and I are, don't take for granted the person in front of you.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything special. We'll get to a guy here in a minute that talked about just, the mundane of life. Nothing special you have to do. The next guy we had was really, I thought, interesting. I've continued a conversation and relationship with this guy. He's doing some interesting things, but his name's Thad Wells. I came across Thad earlier this spring, and he was a fired coach himself in January, looking for what he was going to do. He's got just a lot of different talents, and we could talk about him for days with different things. But one thing I wanted to highlight is something he has, and he calls it the 4D game plan. And he uses this a lot with his social media prowess, but he talks about discover, because I think this really speaks to God in our lives. Discover, discern, decision, do it. And he says you'll get results from that process. Discover, discern, decision, do it. 4D game plan. But here's the word that jumped out. Then he says feedback. And when I heard the word feedback, who I thought of was our buddy Al Saunders, who we had on there a year ago. And he talked about great coaches give immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Another thing, and I'll let you turn it to you. Another thing he said, we all need to have a vision that's so noble, something that we're living for that's a noble cause that gives us that ability to see into the future and have a great vision. What did you take away from Thad, whether it's some of the things I mentioned or something else?
Well, once again, it's interesting how these people come up in your lives. My first year when I took the job down here in Mobile, our coach talked about this guy who had this, wristband system that basically had the plays written out, but also the plays drawn up on your wristband. It's called the Ruski system, and this was from Thad Wells. So I knew of him a couple years before we ever talked to him. And, it's just a guy who's very passionate, very intelligent, works very, very hard, and is striving for efficiency and trying to accomplish what he wants to accomplish, but also not lose focus on that noble calling you were talking about. And it was just a great conversation. And just over the last few weeks and months, just the impact he's played in this ministry, and just conversations with you and helping you grow and to improve. We're eternally grateful. And, obviously, one of the things that I took away, Dad, was he talked that, he's been a successful coach. I think he won a state championship. But he talked about, his first losing season, and he gets fired, and he walks out the door and he feels like this weight comes off of him. I sit there and think of my career as a player or as a coach and think, as much as I've loved this game, the weight and the burden that I've carried trying to pursue this thing, it's just different than what, I read in the Bible, right? My burden's easy, or my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We are taught and trained to carry so much in this profession, especially. And, you think your natural response would be to be completely dejected and afraid, but it was almost like a relief feeling from what I heard. And so for me, sitting and hearing him being vulnerable and honest and hearing about what he's excited about moving into the future, with what is the Tackle Life, Dad? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. It's just exciting. And it's proof of resiliency that we can find in our faith. That, when things in this world don't go the way you expected, we can bounce back, because our hope and our anchor is not found in strictly the last performance or the scoreboard or the job that I carry. And because what I realize is there's so many coaches out there that has so many gifts and talents and abilities, and sometimes we get just swamped down with the work that we have to hide a bunch of those things. But he's living and walking proof of that guy's a talented guy, and he's going to do some amazing things in this profession and so much more.
You asked him in the podcast, and I thought this was an interesting answer for our listeners to chew on. You asked him for his definition of success, and he pondered for a while, and he said, success is peace. He said, it's a peace of mind when you know you've done your best.
Yeah.
And I thought that goes a lot along with what Dr. Selking and Ted Rath talked about in excellence. Success is peace.
Yeah.
A peace of mind when you do your best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another one we had here just recently, and I thought was really good, was Paul Bird, 14-year major league pitcher that was continually overlooked and just kept showing up. But his life, he talked about, the people along the way. And, And he said those people that we all have in our life that believe in you.
Yeah.
I think of my Uncle Jerry, he's my high school baseball, football coach, Jerry. And, in their own way, it just might be a word. They say something that clicks and ends up touching your life for the rest of your life. But then he followed it with this, and I think this applies really to the scriptures. Because Jesus tells us a lot about who we are and that he believes in us. He says, but we all have the choice. This is Paul speaking. We all have the choice to receive what they say about you today.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
What are
powerful.
your thoughts with Paul Bird?
Well, first off, how do you keep finding these people? That is we got a wide variety of people with great stories and doing great things. But he was just such uh, a blessing to spend time with. Someone who has a very similar heart to ours. For him and his wife, they do something for hurting people, and to help kind of restore and rejuvenate them, and to encourage them along the way. Obviously, he was a great athlete, great pitcher, but the guy's just so wise. I loved his story, Dad, about how he ended up winning or getting elected into the All-Star game. We sit and you know it, it's easy. We put stuff behind us just to remember all my accomplishments and things I've done. But that when I saw his All-Star jersey, it meant a whole lot more when you heard his story, and just the lows that came before the highs, and that jersey meant so much more than just a little jersey. It was a man who persevered and was resilient through a difficult season, and God bless his faithfulness and his obedience to walk through it, and just went literally one game at a time. Ended up staying with the team, and over the next year or so, ended up becoming invited or getting invited to the All-Star game. So that was awesome, and it was just like you said, people are so important, and I think God's greatest expression, or his glory, or his wish, or his hope. I love in that verse where it says hope of glory. If you break that down and you replace hope with or just put the word wish, and then I always think of glory as extension. God's wish for extension. What's his wish for extension? To overflow through me, and overflow through you, and overflow through every person on this earth, and just extend himself into all of the world. And so for me, it's I think it's a great reminder that we can carry life and hope for people with just the words that come out of our mouth, that encourage us, and in the midst of great adversity, sit there and anchor down with a person and say, you don't have to believe what they're saying about you. That's a label. That's their opinion, and they're entitled to that. But you don't have to believe that. The only opinion or belief, or only opinion you have to be concerned about is the Creator's opinion. And when you learn to focus on that, like that story I've used, I'm sure, many a times, all those other thoughts and opinions and labels fall right off of you, because they just don't hold value anymore. Because the one who is an authority over all things, carries such a great perspective and desire to know you, and just to once again to give up your own son's life for you. That in itself says you have great value.
Well, I hope you're enjoying our podcast today, but I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Our nonprofit organization, The Win Awakening, is the reason we're able to have this podcast. The Win Awakening is a sports ministry network that began in November of 2022. The Win mission is to encourage and empower leaders to live from a place of victory as they awaken to their wholeness and true identity within environments where they can be known. Our goal is to create safe environments where transparency and vulnerability are accepted, and value and worth are recognized in an atmosphere of love. If you'd like to support the Win Awakening, as well as our podcast, you can donate now at winawakening.org. And please spread the word about our ministry with your friends. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Awaken Kingdom Culture on our Spotify and YouTube channels, to listen or watch our podcast weekly, every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern. And if you'd like to follow my socials, as well as hear about the upcoming podcast news, watch the latest clips, and get an inside look at my life behind the scenes, you can follow us on Instagram at Awaken Kingdom Culture and Facebook, Awaken Kingdom Culture Podcast. Well, let's get back to the podcast. Well, it's interesting you used the word glory and then said opinion, because that's what that word means. In the Greek is the word doxa, and it says it means his opinion. So his glory is his opinion of you and I, and that's the one we have to listen to. The other thing I liked about Paul, when he talked at the very end, just showed his humility. He was talking about his relationship with his wife. And he said, for so long, and we all have been there or are there, he said, well, I thought I had to do something for God. I had to do this big thing spiritually for him. And he talked about doing the dishes. Yeah. He said, doing the dishes for my wife is a big thing. And just, seeing Christ in the mundane. We don't have to be in front of thousands. You and I have said that from day one with our ministry. One matters. And I just thought that was such a reminder that the extraordinary is usually found in the ordinary.
Yeah.
And if we can be alert to that ordinary and that person in those mundane moments, miraculous things happen.
Yes.
So over the last 6 months, there was a book that also came into my life that made me think, as we transition to something here in a minute that we'll talk about, but it was the book called The Gift of One Day. I've alluded to it earlier in some podcasts. The authors are Carrie and Chris Shook. They're pastors in Houston. And it's a story about their grandson who was given one day of life. And he's talked about, how it has helped them see that our hours are opportunities rather than obligations. I thought that was a great quote. In a matter of moments, our lives can change. And there's many that are listening to this that can say yes. And maybe right now today your life has changed. It's been turned upside down. One day changed the way they lived forever, they said, when their grandson died after 24 hours of life. And they said, nothing surprises Papa. And he's the one that's writing your story. And guess what? He's not finished writing it. It's going to be okay. And one day at a time, one breath at a time is how he wants us to live our life, unwrapping each day as a gift. And in the midst of this pain, the Father sends this verse, which is just a hidden gem in the scriptures, because I don't think many people hang out in the book of Jude. But he sends this to the grandfather, and I'll read it out of the book of Jude. It's Jude chapter 1, verse 1 and 2 in the Message. It's really, really well said. It says, I, Jude, am a slave to Jesus Christ and a brother to James, writing to those loved by God, the Father, called and kept safe by Jesus Christ. Now imagine the son whose son is dying, sharing this with the Father, and this is what the second part says. Relax. Everything's going to be all right. Rest. Everything's coming together. Love is on the way.
Oh.
I get chills reading it again.
I just did too.
Yeah. Relax. Everything's going to be okay. Rest. Everything's coming together. Open your hearts, for love is on the way. So that book, Mom and I actually read it chapter to chapter, or at lunch we'd read a chapter and then talk about it. And has been a reminder for me. And as you alluded to earlier, some of the things we're walking through as a family right now. And just a reminder of the statement we've always said as well. The person in front of you is the most important person of your day. And walking in life and having the faith in Papa's faith in the midst of relationship, in your daily happenings and all the things you encounter. So I thought I'd share that as we transition here. But just the importance of one day. It's a gift. And if we can remind each other of that in the midst of even the worst times, relax, rest. Love is on the way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, what I wanted to get to today, and I know that was a big intro, but I think it was hopefully a blessing to those that are listening, because those people had some rich things to say, and I know it's touched our lives. But you and I are entering a different phase in our life right now.
Yep.
Something that neither one of us have ever taken part of, and I called it the Seasonless Coach. Because right now, at least, unless God does something different, you and I aren't going to be coaching this fall. And it'll be our first season. For me, it'll be the first time in 36 years. And for you, it's what, 15th?
Yeah. As far as being part of a season, that would be my whole life. But yeah, it'd be 14 years as a coach. Yes.
So, a lot of things that I think the questions that are asked when maybe it's not going the way you thought or hoped, we want to ask why. We want that why, which puts us in our imagination and puts us out there trying to figure things out. There's no rest ever attached to that why question. Versus what now? What now, Papa? So I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, I know you've been all over social media over the last probably 2 months, but let's talk a little bit about what, Austin's going to do in his first seasonless fall as a football coach. What's the what now for you, Austin? Tell our listeners.
Well, what I'm getting a great reminder of is I'm still coaching.
Mm.
I'm not, just because I'm not on a sideline for this particular year, which could be forever, could be for a year. I don't know. I think, and this has been something in the works for probably 2 years, Dad. If I'm being honest, I thought last year I wasn't going to be on the sideline, and then something presented itself. But this has been the works of God over really my whole football journey, restoring and renewing my mind and my heart, to changing the game that I play. Now I'm not talking about going from football to basketball. I'm talking about the way I go about whatever I do, and my heart behind whatever I do. I've always said that, and I've meant it. I want to, use football as a tool to help people experience his life. But if I'm being honest, I mean, there's been a lot of selfishness along the way too, where I'm trying to elevate my name and climb the ladder and try to be made known. And God's just been slowly, through circumstance, through sometimes positive things, but a lot of negative things. And in a coaching lens, sometimes it feels like suffering, and hurt and pain. And just over time, he's been slowly ripping what I would consider my flesh, a little bit away from me. And because of that, here I am, taking on a new perspective on what it means to coach. And so what does coaching look like for me moving into this season of life? First off, I've been, and let me emphasize this, what I'm learning, in our worldly perspective, Dad, coaching is a higher position than those below you, right? That's kind of the way a coach is viewed. But let's jump to the kingdom, his kingdom. Coaching is lowering yourself, walking in the midst. It's Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. If you want to be great in his kingdom, you got to become least of these. So for me, when I talk about coaching this season, I'm not saying I'm elevating myself over other people. I'm saying I'm coming down into what's in front of me and just trying to love people where they're at, and to share the love of God with those around me as I'm in my own journey. So we've obviously been doing our podcasts, right, for 75 episodes, which I I would have never said I'd be able to do because of my lack of confidence in my ability to communicate uh, smoothly. Um, then there's so God's taken me and said, just take a step of faith and let your word. And I've been amazed at how many encouraging things have come along and said how much this has impacted people.
Mm.
And it's proof that God just needs us to be willing. He'll provide the things that we need if he's the one calling it. The second thing is we did the drive dad this year, and we're closing in on the last few sessions, and we've been I get to talk this week, and it's just been such a blessing. And what I've learned from the drive is it's the environment.
Mm.
It's the safe place to be known. Because that just opens up the ability for the Spirit to move. It is not you, it's not me, it's not Herb, it's not any one of our leaders. We're just coming alongside, sharing our story, creating a safe environment, and then letting God step in and provide hope, to help people grow and have resiliency to bounce back against the difficulties that show up in this world. So walking down this drive has been impactful for my own life because it's forced me to sit and think and get in conversation with God. But also, I find great meaning and value in getting in conversation with other people over things that have eternal value. So that's something I'm doing. I'm still teaching elementary PE, so I'm in front of a bunch of elementary kids, which will test anybody's patience at times. But what a blessing, and what an opportunity to speak truth, to get young kids to think and search for the Father that you and I are both searching for on a day-to-day basis, and to experience his love. And I'm going to be coaching elementary track where I'm at. Not a football coach, an elementary track coach. What a humble step back in a lot of coaches' minds. But in Papa's minds, the value is no less important.
Mm.
Because if everybody is important and every kid is valuable, then every coach that steps on that field or track or court has purpose, because you're encountering someone he loves. So I have great value there. And then, I'm starting this business called Believe QB Academy. It's really been amazing watching God work, because this is something that I've been chipping away at and preparing for probably, since I've graduated college. I might have thought that a lot of it would be coming out in a different avenue, but it's been really encouraging just seeing and sitting and watching how he works. I've been blessed to work with some great quarterbacks here in this Mobile area. When I was, my expectation, Dad, was I was probably going to start with 8-year-old kids around my son's age, which I do, and I'm getting the opportunity to work with them and their fathers or their mothers or their brothers as they come out and work with their kids. And I teach them foundational skills at the beginning levels, and but then we get in conversation, and I get to provoke thought for the parent to pour into their kids. And so that's been fun, just because it feels very valuable and very purposeful. And then obviously I'm getting to work with some, like I said, some big time quarterbacks in this area. And I've always had just such a passion for that position. And, just getting to come alongside and walk with them in their journeys, because as we all know, no matter how good you are, no one's untouchable. Every house gets tested by rain coming down and wind blowing, and just reminding these guys along their journeys of the value of placing your faith on the rock, as opposed to the sand that I've so often have put my faith and identity in. So when I talk about my business, Dad, it, probably 5 or so years ago, it was Karcher QB Academy. And it was really honestly going to be in honor of you, Dad, because those of you who listened to my first podcast, it was, it talked about how I was going to redeem Dad's name. And, I've tried it as a player, tried as a coach. And, so to me, the last name carries my father. So, my logo, if you ever look at it, has the number 12 on there, because that's both our numbers. And so that was kind of the beginning avenue of it. But then God's kind of changed it to Believe QB Academy. So why Believe QB Academy? Well, I think everything, first off, what I've found over time, Dad, is that love God's love for us has always been there. It might feel like it's not there, but it is always has been there and always will be there. What isn't always there is experiencing his life. And the reason we don't experience his life is we don't believe to receive that experience of his life. So if that is what hinges us experiencing his life, that means that belief has to be a very important component of this earth. So when I came up with the name of this company, God put on my heart to name it Believe QB Academy. Now this might be too far-fetched. This might mean nothing to you, but God put some crazy things, that go through my mind. And think of the word, Dad, believe. What's the first 2 letters?
B.
Yep. What's the next 3 letters?
Lie.
And then if you take the last 3 letters, what is it?
Eve.
They originally believed, or they were just being with God in the beginning. Then there was this lie. And then Eve bought into it, which brought Adam into it. So what ends up happening is we changed our whole perspective and we began to measure all of life a different way. But what God's calling us into is to put all those pieces back together and bring us back to the original B. And we have the opportunity to believe and to change our perception and to view God, but also to view ourselves the way he originally did. Well, as a coach, if I believe this to be true, which I obviously do, then there's no greater calling or purpose than to go about using your gifts and talents to get people to think. Because I can't get myself to believe, much less other people, but what I can do is just go around dropping seeds. So, we talk and chime in anytime you want, that. I'm just obviously I'm passionate about this, so I could talk for a little bit, but it's so what am I trying to accomplish with this? There's first off, there's 3 main things I believe are the need. Okay, first off, the first need is, whether we recognize it or not, we all have a need to experience his life. I talk with people when I go trying to find sponsors. I say, first off, and I think I talked about it on one of our podcasts recently, but John 1:4, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. It's talking about Jesus, and it's talking about, in him was life. And that life that he carried was the goal or the light or the desire of all mankind, whether they recognized it or not. How come that's the truth? Because the one created it that way. So if that's the goal, then the question is, what is life? And that's where I jump to John 17:3, which is, now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. It's to know God. Dad, you're experiencing it now. I've experienced it in my life. There's a difference between knowing about God and walking through and experiencing and knowing who he truly is.
Mm. Yes.
And what we understand, Dad, is when we know who he truly is, it changes everything else that we do, and it changes the way we see. So that brings us to, it brings us to the next part, which is, making God known, which is the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where he tells, in 19:20, he tells them to go and make disciples of all nations. Well, I'll tell you one thing, in this country, the quarterback position is almost worshipped if it's not. Just look at where money goes. How much do they pay quarterbacks? Mm. What do we put on every Sunday to watch? What do people write about on Monday mornings or all the way through the week? Quarterbacks. And so, to me, the potential that this position holds into making God known, because it's so impactful to people and people gravitate to it, then imagine if these quarterbacks understand the opportunity that they carry, and they know, and they get to share in just their daily life. And it's not always words, in their actions, in their journey. And some quarterbacks do an unbelievable job already doing this stuff. And then, the last thing is, in Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer. And it's about, bringing his kingdom on this earth. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God wants his kingdom here on earth. Well, so in my business, my hope is to help these quarterbacks and their parents and the people that I'm interacting with on a moment by moment basis to search for life, to understand that life is knowing him, to then helping them take it and making it known, which that's all I'm doing. I'm just trying to make that known in the skill sets that I have. And then from there, imagine if a bunch of people took it to their pockets of the world, whether they become a professional quarterback or not. That brings the kingdom here on this earth. Mm. So then I talk about, the next two things, and I'll go through that quickly, is, relationship with a family member. Awaken kingdom culture is about shifting the way culture thinks and works and moves. We want it to be just like we said in Matthew 6, a kingdom culture, his culture. One that is an upside down way of living. One that, the least of these is the greatest in the kingdom of God that we talked about earlier. Well, how does that happen? Well, it starts at home. So as I mentioned before, I try to not just get in front of the kid. For 8 to 14-year-olds, I bring their parents out there to jump in the process with them, where I'm teaching them the skills as a quarterback. But ultimately what I'm doing is, hopefully building that strength in their relationship so they can have conversations like this that can help the children grow, because the parents are so valuable, or the guardian, or who's ever important in that kid's life, because those kids are the ones that become the next decision makers in this world, and that change culture. So the second goal of need and goal of this business is to help in relationship with a family member. And then finally, quarterback wholeness. I'm a quarterback guy. You've trained me that way, Dad. I've loved that position, and I love that it challenges the whole person. Well, I want to help these kids grow as a whole quarterback, not just a quarterback that can escape the pocket, not just a quarterback that can throw on time, not just a quarterback that can only win on the scoreboard. I want him to be a professional. I want him to be able to throw on time, escape if he has to, move in the pocket, go from under center, go from the gun, work on play action, work off a drop back, work off a quick game, be able to do run checks, be able to group his words in play calls. I mean, all these things. Well, I believe in scaffolding teaching, so I teach 7 levels, starting with Genesis all the way up to a professional, and I want to help them grow over time to become better quarterbacks. And if they can reach their dreams of playing at the highest level, amen. If they can only play to middle school, they still can get value and purpose from what we're doing, because my focus of my company has an eternal focus. It's relationship, getting to know the heart of the Father and making him known in all the world. So whether you're a quarterback or whether you are an electrician or a podcaster or a coach or a teacher or a businessman, whatever pocket of earth you go to, you have a chance to carry him. And I want to help people be aware of that and seize that opportunity.
Wow, well said. It's going to be exciting, as Mom and I have already been watching just how Papa brings the people to you. And I know you've been very encouraged, and we'll trust and continue to ask Papa to bring those that need to be a part of Believe QB Academy. Just last Friday I was helping, our friend Sam Graham. I was working a camp with him, and one of the high school coaches made a great comment, and it's a comment that I'm going to use if I, ever coach again. Is he said, I guess there was maybe a group of 20 young boys, and he said, "How many of you are going to be in the National Football League?" And none, probably, I don't think any raised their hands. He said, how many of you are going to play quarterback on your team? And like 2 raised their hand. He said, "Here's the number one thing I want you to learn today." He said, "I want every young boy or girl," I don't know if we had any girls there that day, but she said it, to be able to throw a football.
Yeah.
He said, not because you'll play quarterback someday, but he said, hopefully, Lord willing, you'll be a dad in the backyard teaching your daughter or son to throw the football.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? That's a great comment. I mean, there were some kids you could tell were going to be linemen, but to teach kids how to throw and catch and all the basics, not so they can go be a pro, but so they can be a dad when they grow up.
And I thought that conversation,
Yeah, I thought it was a great statement by that coach. For me, I was talking to Mom, actually, this came about this morning, so I wrote it down. And I think you would agree, and I think most coaches agree. We've, and I said me when I was talking to Mom, but we've grown up in a culture where sports, and I'm talking right now to coaches and athletes, but it could be anybody in business, I guess. We have always had something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And so when I think of a seasonless that's ahead of me, not probably being on the sidelines, you think, man, there's nothing to look forward to. Because as a coach, you're looking forward to the game on a Saturday or a bowl game or whatever. You always have something to look forward to, a game plan. And I think that's one of the things we as coaches wrestle with is just, what is there to look forward to?
Yeah.
And where Papa is taking me, which it's been a continual, I'm still in the middle of a journey, is the fact that, he says, Ken, I want you to, and this is Win Awakening, I want you to be available. And he's talking a lot, you and I have made this statement, we are a ministry of presence, and we're there when they need us.
Yeah.
Well, that's not, flashy and exciting. And it's not, hey, we're speaking at a conference next week of 7,000 people. No, it's one-on-one relationship when a person gets to the point where they say they need you.
Yeah.
And not that we're going to fix them, but we offer a listening ear, an encouraging word of life. And so for me, as I look at this upcoming season, that if it is a season without a football game that I'm a part of, Papa's just saying, I want you to be aware of the people that I put in your life and I want you to be available to those people. And all I'm asking you for is your presence. I'll do the rest. And that's easier to say than to do.
Yeah.
And so it's been a journey and a process. And
Dad,
I did.
you know
Go
what
ahead.
hit me while you were saying that was, and sometimes as a coach you get so tunnel visioned, and you think, well, we got to prep for these 10 games this year, or 15 games if you're in high school playing for a championship, or 20 something games if you're in the pros. That's 20 days of your life in that 1 year. We're living for 20 days, as opposed to what I think we're being called to, Dad, and everyone's called to, is every opportunity that sits in front of us. So we can come in where our expectation isn't an event. Our expectation is God's going to show up in the next conversation I'm about to have, or, the next group of people I get to talk with, or someone pouring into me in this moment, or this time with my kids, or, it's amazing. We get so tunnel vision that we don't have anything to look forward to. In some ways, we're actually freeing up to be available to more things, like you just said. And once again, that doesn't mean we'll never coach again, because we're learning how to be obedient to whatever God calls in the season or in the moment. But, the one thing that I know is God's not really, his focus is not the circumstances. It's our perception on the circumstances that he's trying to renew and shape and view. And so regardless of what we do, just like, what is it, 1 Thessalonians 5:16?
18. Mm-hmm.
To rejoice always, to live with thanksgiving, and
Make your life a prayer.
Make your life a prayer in all circumstances. So if it doesn't look like a season, we still have the same opportunity we did with a season,
Mm-hmm. Well, it's, I hope that, I think as you and I talked, that this podcast, we're going to make it into 2, because, we've had some good conversation here. And, our desire in this hour that we've just spent together was to be able to just, share with people some of the people that have crossed our paths, some of the things that we've been able to discuss with them, and then bring it into our own life of, as I said, being part of a seasonless year right now for both of us, and what that looks like in transition. And, giving you a chance to talk about Believe QB Academy and just the continual growth of Win Awakening. So, I want to thank our listeners for taking time to allow you and I to share our life with them, and to allow, us to talk to them about where we are. And Awakened Kingdom Culture is about what? Awakening hearts and minds, one story at a time.